Hey guys, tonight we're taking a slow, uneasy walk back to a time when the concept of healthcare was at best ambitious, and at worst, flat out, fatal. You stand in the doorway of a dim, dirt-floored cottage. The air is thick with the unmistakable stench of rot, sweat, and unwashed bedding. A sick child wheezes in the corner. Someone nearby is muttering a prayer. There's no disinfectant. There's no thermometer. There's no doctor coming, unless you count the barefoot man with a sack of leeches who just trundled past you with a look of grim purpose. This isn't going to be a feel-good journey. In fact, you probably won't survive this. But that's kind of the point. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the night. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch just inside the cottage, careful not to touch anything. The smell alone could be contagious, or at least that's what you assume, based on how many people inside are wrapped in linens and groaning. There's no formal diagnosis here. The woman in the back is cursed, the boy coughing in the straw has bad humours, and the man with the purple rash is either close to recovery or dead by morning. Medical knowledge, if you can call it that, floats more on faith and folklore than anything empirical. Historians still argue whether medieval healers truly believed in their own methods or were simply repeating what they were told by someone slightly less confused. You scan the room. No glass jars, no clean cloths, no bright white lab coats, just a series of misaligned wooden shelves holding brown, murky liquids, mouldy herbs, and a skull or two, possibly human, possibly decorative. This is what counts as a sick room. Your host, the head of the household, is clearly worried. His wife hasn't eaten in 3 days. A neighbour brought over a tonic, allegedly distilled from boiled frog legs and river moss, and insisted it chased death right out of her uncle's spleen. But you can see the woman's eyes fluttering, more out of weakness than relief. The mattress she lies on is made of straw and bundled rags. The lice don't even bother hiding. You try not to imagine the germs. There's a bucket in the corner for waste, and the family has done their best to keep the smell down by burning dried rosemary and tossing in lavender sprigs. It doesn't help. And yet, this is what care looks like when it's at its most loving. Someone offers you a cup of water. You hesitate. It's probably drawn from the same stream where the pigs wallow, but refusing would be rude. You take a cautious sip, and it tastes like damp dirt and regret. Children are crying outside. A bell tolls in the village, announcing another death. You glance at the ceiling, noticing the beams are black with smoke stains from years of cooking fires and incense burning. It's warm here, but not in a cozy way, more like being slowly smoked alive. The man of the house explains that the local priest will visit soon. He'll pray, sprinkle a little holy water, and, if the patient is still breathing, perhaps recommend a pilgrimage, or at least a donation. You wonder what the success rate is. A cat pads across the floor and curls near the sick woman's feet. Someone murmurs that this is a good sign. In medieval folklore, a cat sleeping beside a patient means the soul still wants to stay. Or maybe the cat just likes warm bodies. One girl in the room holds a carved wooden amulet over her chest. Keeps the miasma out, she whispers. Miasma, the invisible cloud of bad air said to cause disease, is the dominant theory of contagion. Not bacteria, not viruses, just bad smells. You accidentally sneeze, every head turns. Well, that's not ideal, the old woman mutters from a shadowed corner. As night falls, you realize the room has no candles. just a central hearth, and its flame is almost out. Someone adds a twisted bundle of dried herbs to it, and the air fills with acrid smoke. Your eyes water. Apparently this is meant to purify the room. You try to steady your breath and remember, modern medicine is centuries away. In this place, fever is fate, and fever dreams are the closest thing to hope. The fire flickers, someone groans. And outside, the moon rises slowly over a village that's far more familiar with death than recovery. If you're lucky, you'll just leave here with a cold. If you're unlucky, they'll wrap you in a shroud and carry you to the hill by dawn. You step out of the sick room and into the mud-slicked village square, where hope is often pinned to a name. Not of a saint, but of a healer. And in this world, doctor doesn't always mean what you think it does. The most educated medical men wear long robes, speak Latin, and wield their diplomas like shields. They've studied the teachings of Galen, Hippocrates, and Avicenna, often without questioning a word. Their knowledge is heavy on theory and light on reality. You might be dying of dysentery, but they're busy explaining your hot and moist imbalance and prescribing saffron. Imported, of course. That is, if you can afford them. More likely, your healer today is the local barber surgeon. He trims beards, pulls teeth, sets bones, and, on particularly eventful market days, might even lance a boil while humming a cheerful tune. His shop is easy to spot. Just follow the red and white pole outside, originally a symbol of blood and bandages. There's probably a bucket of leeches on the counter next to his scissors. 2 for 1 special. You sit on his rickety stool while he examines your swollen ankle. "A bad humour," he mutters, poking it with something that might once have been a knife. It's more rust than blade now. "We'll let it bleed." You ask about infection. He looks confused. "You mean pus?" he says. "Pus is good. It means your body's trying to help." Not quite. But he's earnest, and that counts for something. Meanwhile, a few feet away, an elderly bone setter is preparing to treat a dislocated shoulder by pulling on it and hoping for the best. She's not licensed, there's no such thing, but people say she's got healing hands. Also, she brews a mean nettle tea that drives out spirits. Spirits in this context meaning either disease or actual ghosts, depending on who you ask. Historians still argue whether these local practitioners were more effective than their university-trained counterparts, and honestly, from the screams echoing down the alley, it might be a tie. In some towns, there's a physic garden near the church, where monks or nuns grow medicinal herbs. They work quietly, tending mint, wormwood and comfrey, and sometimes even give tinctures to those too poor for the doctor, but too wary of the barber. Their remedies smell better, at least. Still, one wrong dose, and it's off to eternal rest with Saint Apollonia. Back in the square, someone's selling amulets said to protect against disease. One is carved from bone, another from polished jet. A woman insists hers kept her husband from dying of the sweating sickness. When you ask where her husband is now, she lowers her voice and says, "Well, he's not dead from sweating." She doesn't elaborate. Your attention shifts to a young apprentice rushing through the crowd, carrying a basin full of steaming cloths and what looks like a bucket of pig's fat. He's training with the town's most experienced healer, a man who's never read a book in his life but has an uncanny record of helping people not die. His secret. "Listen to the body," he says, "and trust your nose," which is both comforting and unsettling. You pass by a public notice nailed to a wooden board, a recent edict from the city council banning unlicensed surgery after sunset. Apparently, the last operation ended with a man losing 3 fingers and gaining a dead rat in his bandage. It's unclear which part was the violation. Then again, it's not like there's a medical board to complain to. You duck into a side alley and find a house with a painted sign, a mortar and pestle crossed over a staff. The herbalist inside greets you warmly and offers something for your cough. It smells like tree sap, vinegar, and regret. You take it anyway. What's one more risk? The healer tells you that different townsfolk have different expectations. Nobles want imported spices, elaborate diagnoses, and prayers in Latin. Peasants want fast relief and don't care if the cure comes from a cow, a monk, or the moon. Speaking of the moon, your healer checks its phase before handing you a salve. Not wise to treat phlegm under a waxing crescent, she says, seriously. You don't argue. By now you've begun to understand that titles mean little in this world. A doctor may be more philosopher than practitioner. A barber might save your life with a timely amputation, and a wrinkled widow with a pocket full of dried petals might be the only person who truly sees you as a human, not a collection of misaligned fluids. As the sun dips lower, you catch sight of a travelling surgeon setting up near the edge of town. His wagon creaks with supplies, bone saws, rolled bandages, pots of pine tar. His services are cheap, his hands are fast, and his success rate is, well, hopeful. You watch as he pulls a man's tooth using only a rag and a whispered prayer. The patient faints, the surgeon shrugs, someone claps, someone vomits. And you? You decide maybe it's best to keep your ailments a secret for now. Because in a time when your health depends more on luck than logic, silence might be the safest medicine of all. You wake with a headache. Not surprising, considering you spent the night in a straw bed beside a snoring pig, and a neighbour who muttered about demons in her bread. But in this world, your pounding skull isn't just from bad sleep or stress. Oh no, it's a warning sign from deep inside your body's most mysterious system, the four humours. You groggily sit up and wonder, is it bile again? Maybe phlegm? Perhaps your black bile has become rebellious overnight, stirred by the moon, that impish orb of imbalance. Welcome to humoral theory, the medical cornerstone of medieval life. Every ache, rash, or case of the grumps is blamed on a misalignment of your internal fluids, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each corresponds with a different personality type, a different season, and even a different astrological sign. In theory, your very identity drips from these invisible juices. Blood makes you cheerful, ruddy, and prone to romantic poetry. Phlegm means you're calm, maybe sluggish, fond of napping and porridge. Yellow bile, that's the fiery stuff, rage, ambition, and quick tempers. Black bile, the most mysterious, brings melancholy, deep thoughts, and probably a chronic love of dramatic size. You poke your own stomach, hard to tell what's sloshing where. In the town square, the local physician, yes, the robed one, is holding a short public lecture. He's scrawled a diagram on a wax board, showing the balance of humours with little faces next to each. Happy blood, sad bile, confused phlegm. You'd laugh if he weren't so serious. Too much heat, he proclaims, dries the humours and leads to fevers. He waves a long feather in your direction, then sniffs the air as if trying to diagnose your aura. You smell melancholic, he declares. Avoid lentils. Lentils? Dry foods worsen your black bile, he says. Take wine, boil sage, rub your feet with goose fat. You nod politely, pretending this is new information. Historians still argue whether people genuinely believed the humours controlled everything, or if it simply gave structure to the chaos. Either way, treatments are built around this theory like castles on shifting sand. You wander through the market and see it everywhere. A boy with a nosebleed is being fed leeks, something about purging excess heat. A woman coughing in the corner is wrapped in a damp cloth to restore her moisture. A knight recovering from battle wounds drinks watered-down vinegar because his bile has coagulated. You overhear a heated debate, no pun intended, between two students of medicine. One insists that melancholy comes from too much time indoors, too much sleep, and too many thoughts. The other swears it's caused by unseasonal pairs. Neither suggests rest. And because each humour is linked to a season, your fate is basically calendrical roulette. If your humours are naturally dry, you'd best avoid dry seasons. Autumn might literally kill you. You make a note to never travel in October again. In some monasteries, monks use coloured stones or wax tablets to track patients' humoral states. There's even a board game version, Guess the Humour, where tokens are moved based on symptom cards. It's unclear whether anyone ever wins. A quirky tradition you encounter next involves urine. Yes, urine charts. A local healer has a full row of glass vials, each filled with pee of different shades, labelled like a medieval rainbow, from pale straw to thick ochre with flecks of heaven knows what. Each colour points to an imbalance. She holds up your sample to the light and hums. Bit of black bile, a smudge of choler, definitely lunar interference. She offers you a dried plum and a warning about Saturn. And then there's your astrological chart, which conveniently overlaps with your humoral state. Born under Mars, what's your bile? Jupiter child, your blood is probably enthusiastic. Mercury types tend toward overthinking and runny noses. You laugh under your breath, then immediately cough, and someone nearby offers you a packet of crushed coriander. Good for the lungs, they say, calms the yellow bile. You accept, because what's one more medieval herb in your system? Later, at supper, your host serves you boiled turnips and bread soaked in garlic oil. Warming foods, she explains, to counter your cold phlegm. You nod and chew obediently, thinking about the feast you could be having if not for your treacherous inner fluids. You begin to realize, in this world, food is never just food. It's medicinal, moral, and deeply symbolic. Cheese might embolden your blood. Fish might dampen your spirits. And heaven help you if you pair hot, dry food with a hot, dry temperament. You'll basically combust. You end the evening beside a fire, sipping a bitter tea brewed from elderflower and apple bark. To soothe your spleen, your host says, you smile thinly, unsure where your spleen even is. As you stare into the flames, you start to understand why people clung to these theories. They offer control in a world filled with chaos, sickness, and inexplicable suffering. If your humours are misaligned, there's at least something you can do, even if it involves vomit, vinegar, or a ritual goat dance. And tomorrow, you might feel better, or your phlegm will stage a coup and you'll start sneezing blood. Such is the gamble of medieval health. The next morning, you wake up to shouting outside. It's not a festival, it's not a fire, it's something far more routine and far more medieval. Today, someone's being bled. You shuffle to the doorway in your wrinkled tunic and watch the scene unfold like it's perfectly normal, because it is. The patient, a man in his 30s who looks twice that, sits on a low stool with a thin cloth wrapped around his arm. He's pale, shaking slightly, and muttering a prayer. The barber surgeon crouches beside him, sleeves rolled up, blade in hand, looking equal parts reverent and bored, one clean slice across the vein. The blood pours out into a ceramic bowl already half full. Too much blood, the barber says, as if that explains everything. You blink. Isn't blood kind of essential? Not here. Not if your humours are out of whack. And bloodletting, the art of strategically removing the very thing keeping you alive, is one of the most widespread remedies in Europe. For headaches, fevers, indigestion, melancholy, gout, maybe heartbreak. If it ails you, it probably requires a pint or two less blood. You try not to gag as the bowl sloshes red in the morning light. This isn't just about slicing veins either. Oh no, there are options. Leeching, for instance, a more delicate affair performed by placing live leeches, yes, actual squirmy worms with teeth, on your skin and letting them feast like tiny medical vampires. You encounter a young woman later in the day with 3 leeches clinging to her temple. "For my moods," she whispers, eyes unfocused. One leech wriggles gently as if agreeing. Historians still argue whether leeching ever produced real benefit, or was simply a placebo covered in slime. Either way, it remains weirdly popular. Another option: cupping. You see it performed by a local herbalist who heats small glass bulbs over a flame, then presses them onto a man's back. The skin balloons into purple domes beneath the suction. "Draws out the bad," she says. She doesn't say what bad means. There's also scarification, which is exactly what it sounds like. Deliberate surface cuts to let blood or pus ooze from specific areas. One particularly chipper practitioner in town uses a tiny comb-like blade. You overhear her explaining that the back of the neck holds too much heat. You make a mental note never to show her the back of your neck. Later in the day, a young boy collapses after being bled for a cough. The crowd murmurs, but no one seems shocked. Someone says, "He must have had a weak constitution." Someone else shrugs, "Better drained than poisoned." You're not sure that's a comforting dichotomy. Not all bleeds are equal, of course. There's technique involved. You don't bleed from just anywhere. No, each part of the body is linked to different organs, humours, and sometimes, strangely, sins. Bleeding from the ankle might help with anxiety, the arm for fevers, the forehead for arrogance, maybe. You find a chart in a dusty apothecary shop, a medieval version of a pressure map, showing exactly where to cut and why. It's labelled with Latin terms and tiny angels. It looks more like a map to summon a demon than a guide to getting well. You also learn that timing is everything. Bleeding is often done according to the moon's phase. A waning moon means it's time to remove fluids. A waxing moon? Better not. Your body might rebel and become too receptive, whatever that means. There's even a notion of bleeding on certain holy days being safer, more sanctified. One friar mentions St. Sebastian's feast as a particularly good time to purge bad humours. You ask why. He simply points upward and whispers, "The angels know." Of course, all this assumes you're not too weak. If you are, then no bloodletting, just a purge instead. Which brings you to your second horror of the day, vomitives and laxatives. You watch as a man drinks a thick, black liquid to expel the bile. 5 minutes later, he's running toward the woods with an expression of urgent regret. "Success," his wife says proudly. For women, the bleeding is sometimes monthly and built in, menstruation, the natural purge. But if it's irregular, a doctor might suggest extra bleeding or, in a pinch, a hot stone on the abdomen, because of course that would help. Sometimes bleeding is prescribed to calm the passions. A lovesick youth? Drain a little blood. A woman accused of hysteria? Open a vein. A man who won't stop yelling at his cow? Or maybe just a few leeches to the wrist. And don't forget battlefield bleeding, which isn't really optional. If you're wounded, the surgeon will bleed you anyway to restore balance. Never mind that you're already bleeding out, he'll just formalize it. You try to imagine your own reaction, should you fall ill, and someone suggest bloodletting. You'd probably laugh, and then you'd die. Because refusing treatment can be seen as superstition or worse, heresy. If the church supports it and the physician supports it, who are you to say no? Besides, you don't want to insult the guy holding the razor. As the sun dips low again, you watch the final bleeding of the day. A woman with boils on her neck, having her forearms sliced and wrapped in linen soaked with vinegar. "It's working," she whispers. "I feel light." You can't argue with that. Of course she does. She's lost nearly a pint. Later, as you wash your hands in a stream and try to forget what you've seen, You look down and notice something squirming near your foot, a leech. Just in case you needed one for later, you back away slowly. In this world, everyone's got too much of something, and someone always thinks it should be drained out. It's twilight now, and a low mist rolls in over the fields as you make your way toward the edge of the village, where a crooked little house leans against a leaning little tree. A thin trail of smoke curls from the chimney. A faint scent of mint, vinegar, and something burnt tickles your nose. Inside this humble hut lives the herbalist, the wise woman, the midwife, the cunning folk. Titles shift depending on whom you ask and how superstitious they're feeling that week. You knock. The door creaks open before you even touch it. "Bad stomach?" she asks before you say a word. You nod. She beckons you in. The room is small but bursting with colour and chaos. Bundles of dried herbs dangle from the ceiling like green chandeliers. Jars line every shelf, filled with roots, berries, powders, and thick, unidentifiable substances that look like they came from under a medieval bed. A fat orange cat watches you from the windowsill, one eye missing, the other judgmental. You sit. She brews. You wait. Her remedy is a steaming green potion, thick as stew, flecked with what looks like dandelion petals and pepper flakes. It smells like grass clippings soaked in wine, and yet, oddly, your mouth waters. "Sip slowly," she instructs. "It needs time to argue with your liver." You oblige. Herbs are the cornerstone of non-surgical medieval healing. While university-educated physicians are busy scribbling Latin on scrolls, folk healers are in the woods picking nettles and muttering about moonflowers. Willow bark for pain, yarrow for wounds, sage for strength, lavender for sleep. It's an earthborn pharmacy with no patent and no real instructions, just experience passed down by candlelight. Some healers learn their trade from books, especially translations of Greek and Arab medical texts. Others learn from mothers, grandmothers, or sheer trial and error. "A little too much hemlock," one says, "and you're not curing a fever, you're curing existence." You nearly spit your tea. Historians still argue whether these herbalists were more effective than licensed doctors, or just better at treating people who couldn't afford Latin diagnoses. What is certain, they were trusted, even feared, especially when they got results. The potion is beginning to settle in your stomach like a warm, weird hug. She hands you a second blend, this one for rubbing on your chest, apparently to draw out deep sickness. It smells like pine tar and fermented onions. You try not to flinch. It's not all roots and rubs, though. Medieval potions sometimes call for less charming ingredients. Powdered snail shells, ground beetle wings, mouldy bread, even a dash of mummy dust. Yes, actual powdered human remains, imported from Egypt and sold for an absurd price at upper-class apothecaries. It's supposed to boost vitality. You know, like consuming ancient royalty helps you live forever. And if herbs aren't working, there's always urine therapy, or warmed cow dung applied to the chest, or a poultice made from butter, crushed pearls, and the ash of a burnt hedgehog. You are not making that up. Someone else already did centuries ago. You notice a small glass vial on the herbalist's shelf, labelled dragon's blood. You raise an eyebrow. "Tree resin," she says flatly. "But it helps people believe it works, and that counts." Placebo, medieval style, but the real wild card in all this, the overlap between herbalist and witch. One day you're curing fevers, the next you're accused of consorting with Satan because someone's cow got sick after you passed by it. You learn that women, in particular, walk a tightrope. Cure too many people too quickly and you might be praised or burned. There's a dark corner of the healer's hut with a small iron box. Inside, old notes, bones, and what looks like dried poppy heads. You don't ask questions. She offers you one last item, a tiny amulet tied with red string and filled with rosemary, garlic skin, and a pinch of crushed salt. Protection, she says, from illness and idiots. You wear it. Can't hurt. Back in the village, others are preparing their own remedies. An old man soaks his feet in warm beer mixed with thyme. A child is being fanned with a chicken wing, while someone chants a rhyme about Saint Radegund. A girl drinks a brew that makes her belch smoke. Probably too much angelica root. And all around, the official doctors look on in vague disapproval, as if holding their breath and waiting for someone to collapse so they can say, "I told you so." You pause in front of the apothecary's window. It's stocked like a witch's pantry. Jars labelled viper oil, black hellebore, and plague vinegar. Behind the counter, the owner mixes up what he calls a universal theriac, a miracle cure containing 64 ingredients, including opium, cinnamon, and maybe the memory of a saint. You ask the price. He names a number that could buy a horse. Or 3. You walk away. The herbalist's green soup is still working its magic or delusion in your gut. Either way, you feel okay. Not great. But certainly better than you did an hour ago. Maybe it's the garlic. Maybe it's the placebo. Maybe it's the sense that someone actually cared enough to stir a pot for you. And in a world where half your neighbors think sneezing means sin, that might be the most powerful cure of all. As night thickens, you return to your borrowed bed with your red string amulet, your new herbal salve, and a vague fear that tomorrow's remedy might involve something worse, like spiders or boiled pigeon. You close your eyes and hope the cat on the window ledge is a good omen, not just a freeloading spirit animal. You wake up before the sun, stirred by the sound of soft bells and low chanting echoing from the monastery just beyond the trees. The herbalist's potion from last night still tingles in your belly, and the string amulet around your neck has left a faint itch. But you're alive for now, and that's more than can be said for the man being carried on a wooden board past your window. He's stiff, he's pale, he's definitely not blinking, but according to the monk walking beside him, he died under the wrong sign, which of course is a bad sign. You follow the procession at a distance, partly out of curiosity, partly because you've heard whispers that astrology might actually determine your chance of survival. Yes, really. In medieval medicine, the stars don't just twinkle above, they reach into your bloodstream, tinker with your spleen, and apparently dictate whether your fever is fatal or just character building. The local physician is already preparing today's treatment schedule, but he won't lift a finger until he's consulted the planetary alignments. A large chart lies open on his desk, covered in concentric circles, scribbled notes, and tiny drawings of goats, rams, and strange humanoid lions. You point to a sunburst symbol near the edge. Is that the sun? He shakes his head. That's Mars in Aries, hot and dry, dangerous for phlegm. Of course, he tells you that every planet corresponds with one of the 4 humors. Mars increases yellow bile, too much can cause rashes, aggression, and general unpleasantness. The moon boosts phlegm. Saturn is cold and slow, just like melancholy. Jupiter, bless him, is generally helpful. Venus, fertility and fevers. Mercury, good for the mind, unless he's in retrograde, which unfortunately he is. You ask what this means for your lingering cough. He peers at your palm, hums, and declares, "Today is not the day for treatment. The moon is in a watery house. Rest and reflect. Can I at least take an herb? Not unless it's ruled by Venus and gathered during the waxing crescent. Otherwise the energies may counteract." You consider arguing. Then you remember, that this is a man who once refused to lance a boil because Jupiter was sulking in Leo. You nod respectfully and back away. Elsewhere in the village, the barber surgeon has no patience for such delays. "If your arm's swollen, I'll open it," he grumbles, sharpening his knife on a windowsill. "What's a planet got to do with pus?" A fair question, but the truth is, medieval medicine was tangled in astrology like twine around a roast duck. Medical training included astrology as a core subject, and practitioners would consult zodiac man charts, bizarre diagrams showing which star signs ruled which body parts. Aries governed the head, Taurus the neck, Gemini the arms, and so on, down to Pisces at the feet. So if you have a stomachache while Virgo is rising, you might be in celestial danger. If your spleen acts up during a solar eclipse, pack your things. Historians still argue whether astrology was sincerely believed or simply used as a mystical cover for guesswork, but it shaped diagnosis, treatment, and even surgical timing. Bloodletting, for instance, was often scheduled based on moon phases and planetary houses. A misplaced incision on a Saturn-heavy day could be considered not just careless, but cosmically reckless. You peek inside the monastery library and find a huge volume titled De Astronomia Medicorum, its margins filled with notes like "Avoid cutting below the waist in Scorpio." A monk nearby assures you that this is sound advice, especially if you value your kidneys. It's also why so many remedies are marked not just by ingredients, but by harvest time. A sprig of rosemary plucked under a full moon carries more virtue than one snapped off in haste during Mercury's decline. Some apothecaries even label their vials with tiny star symbols. One proudly sells sun-blessed chamomile. Another warns you off eclipse garlic. And don't even think about childbirth without checking the stars. Midwives often carried tiny calendars, not to mark the due date, but to determine the least cursed moment for labor. Ideally, the child would emerge under a favorable planet. Otherwise, doom, misfortune, or possibly a lifelong limp. Later in the day, you witness a man begging a priest to postpone his leg amputation until after the moon clears Pisces. The surgeon rolls his eyes, the priest shrugs, the man loses his leg anyway. You begin to understand that in a world filled with mystery, illness, and unanswered prayers, astrology offered a comforting illusion of order. The heavens may seem distant, but they're more reliable than some of the cures you've tasted. And when you can't trust your doctor, your barber, or even your leeches, well, maybe Mars has a plan. Before bed, a friend insists on doing your horoscope. She draws a chart in the ashes of the hearth, muttering about houses and transits. "You're in danger," she says solemnly. "Your bile is vulnerable to lunar tides." You nod, because what else can you do? You sleep with one eye open, your string amulet still tied around your neck, wondering whether the stars above are watching, or just quietly judging your humors. The bells start ringing before dawn, a slow, hollow clanging that carries on the misty air, rising and falling like the breath of something ancient and afraid. You sit up immediately, heart thudding. That sound only means one thing: the plague is back. You follow a crowd moving silently toward the village chapel. Everyone walks a little farther apart than usual. Mothers cover children's faces with wool shawls. Men clutch sprigs of sweet-smelling herbs like talismans. No one talks above a whisper. Even the crows seem to keep their distance today. At the chapel, a clerk nails a notice to the wooden doors. You squint. One case confirmed. Street of the Saddlers, house marked. There's a red X on the paper. Someone gasps. Someone else quietly retches behind you. You don't need to ask what kind of plague. There's only ever one: the Black Death. Bubonic, septicemic, pneumonic. Take your pick. Doesn't matter. You've entered the deadliest chapter of medieval medicine. where panic spreads faster than knowledge and treatment feels more like ritual than rescue. A boy runs past carrying a basket of dried lavender and rosemary. He drops a handful at every doorstep. You're told to crush them and keep them by your bed, to ward off the bad air. That's miasma theory again. Disease carried not by germs, but by stench. The more foul the smell, the deadlier the disease. Which explains why everyone is now tying bundles of herbs to their hats and stuffing orange peels into their sleeves. You're offered a plague mask, not the beaked kind yet, those come later, but a piece of linen soaked in vinegar and pressed to your face. You accept it because breathing has suddenly become terrifying. The afflicted house is already under quarantine. Someone has painted a large red mark on the door, and two men are boarding up the windows. You hear a woman's voice from inside. It's either prayer or sobbing, or both. Historians still argue whether medieval quarantine efforts helped at all, or simply delayed the inevitable. But fear has a logic of its own. The town physician visits the scene dressed in a long coat and wide-brimmed hat, gloves up to his elbows. He carries a stick, not for walking, but to examine patients from a safe distance. He doesn't go inside, he just taps the boarded-up door gently, as if confirming that death is now a house guest. He turns to you. Keep to your rooms, avoid the wind. Avoid the wind? A friar begins sprinkling holy water on the doorframe. He chants softly, crossing himself every few words. Behind him, the grave digger waits with a blank expression and a half-dug pit. He's been busy this season. Back in the village square, people are lighting braziers of burning juniper and thyme, trying to cleanse the air. Others ring small bells or carry tin tokens of saints. One man has hung a cross around his dog's neck and swears it keeps the sickness away. You don't question him. As the hours pass, rumors spread like fire through dry grass. The Jews poisoned the wells. The baker's daughter was seen sneezing by the well. The barber coughed into a basin and didn't burn it afterward. A woman in the market suddenly screams and falls. People flee in every direction. No one helps her. She's coughing blood. You flee too. Later you take refuge at the edge of town, where an old apothecary is handing out plague water, a concoction of wine, vinegar, cloves, and something bitter that numbs your tongue. It tastes like regret and sadness. You drink every drop. She also sells pestilence beads meant to be worn around the wrist. They rattle like bones. In the next field over, a group of flagellants has arrived. Bare-chested, bleeding, they march in a slow circle, whipping themselves and chanting. They believe the plague is God's punishment, and if they suffer now, the town might be spared. Children stare. Adults avert their eyes. You can't decide if it's terrifying or moving, or both. You ask a monk what to do if you fall ill. He tells you to confess early before the swelling starts. Once the boils come, your mind may cloud. Some say the swelling sings to you at night. That might be the fever talking, but either way, you'd rather not find out. And the treatment? Not much. Sometimes lancing the buboes helps. Other times it kills you faster. Some drink vinegar. Others eat crushed emeralds. A few desperate souls try sitting in the sewer, hoping that stronger smells will fight off the plague smell, like two demons battling it out in your lungs. Nothing works. A healer gives you a paste made from crushed rose petals, ash, and a touch of arsenic. You ask if it's safe. She says, "Only if the stars approve." Wonderful. By nightfall, 3 more homes are marked. The grave digger no longer looks bored. He just looks tired. People are humming that eerie little song again. Ring around the rosy. You'd always thought it was nonsense. Now it sounds like prophecy. You sleep with a mask over your mouth, a pouch of herbs around your neck, and a prayer written in chalk above your bed. You are not sick. yet, but you wake up every hour and check for swelling, because in this town, health is a countdown and the bells don't toll for nothing. You wake to silence. Not the peaceful birdsong kind, but the unnatural hush of a village holding its breath. No laughter, no hammering, no market chatter, just the wind brushing through shuttered windows and the faint clink of something metal far off, like armor or shackles. Someone has died overnight. Again. The red-marked houses now number 5. The churchyard is filling up. And with each fresh death, the village's fragile routines shift to accommodate a grim reality. Today, your journey leads you to a place meant for healing, but one that might be better described as a place for dying slowly, with company, the medieval hospital. It's not what you expect. No bustling wards, no crisp bed sheets or orderly rows of caregivers. You find the hospital behind the abbey, built from rough stone and smelling faintly of wax, cabbage and old wood. A wooden sign creaks above the door. No name, just a crude carving of a hand holding a cross. Inside there are rows of straw mattresses if you're lucky. If not, pallets on the floor. Some have curtains, rags really, for privacy, though they mostly flutter uselessly when someone nearby coughs. There's no nurse call button, just a chance that a monk passing by might notice you're still breathing. A friar greets you not with a thermometer, but a prayer. For strength, he murmurs, then offers you a wooden cup filled with lukewarm ale and a pinch of dried chamomile. Breakfast of the brave. The hospital is run by a religious order, which means medicine here walks hand in hand with piety. Healing the body is secondary to healing the soul. You're encouraged to confess, accept penance, and prepare for death with grace, just in case the boiled mint leaves don't pull you through. The monks are kind, but clearly overworked. One wraps a bandage around a woman's leg while whispering a psalm. Another tries to spoon-feed porridge to a man who can no longer hold his head up. A third is gently washing a dying child's feet. There's no screaming here, only groaning, sighing, and sometimes soft singing. It's oddly peaceful if you ignore the lice, because yes, lice are everywhere. In the bedding, on the robes, crawling near your ear as you lie back to rest. You slap at one, and a nun gently frowns at you. "Offer it up," she says. "Suffering purifies." You try not to roll your eyes. Historians still argue whether medieval hospitals were centers of healing or just places to die with dignity. The truth likely is both. Surgeons aren't welcome here unless it's absolutely necessary. The hospital's job isn't to cut, it's to comfort, which means prayers, herbs, broths, and occasionally bloodletting, because of course. One man is being treated for hot bile with a linen cloth soaked in goat's milk and lavender. Another's been dosed with poppy syrup and now hums quietly to himself while staring at the ceiling. In the corner, a friar copies out verses from De Medicina by hand. The ink smudges slightly as his sleeve brushes the page. He pauses to rub his wrist and mutter about bad posture and divine punishment. The hospital also doubles as a pilgrim's shelter. Many of the beds are taken by travelers who've journeyed for days or weeks to reach a shrine they believe can cure them. Some are covered in dust and blisters. Others wear small tin badges showing where they've been: Canterbury, Santiago, Rome. You pass a woman clutching a bone she insists belonged to St. Margaret. "She once cured a child of lung rot," she whispers. You nod politely. The child beside her doesn't look impressed. There's a small herb garden outside the hospital, tended by novices and a very angry goose. You help pull weeds for a while, at least it gets you fresh air. The garden grows sage, feverfew, comfrey, and something the monks call blessed thistle, which probably tastes as bad as it sounds. Lunch is barley broth, a slab of black bread, and something suspiciously gelatinous in a wooden bowl. You eat most of it. Hunger can humble anyone. That afternoon, the local physician visits to inspect the patients. He scowls at the conditions, mutters about unsanitary devotional spaces, and recommends a bloodletting for half the ward. He stays for 15 minutes, then leaves without touching anyone. As evening falls, you listen to the friars sing Compline, their voices rising in slow harmony as candlelight flickers across the stone walls. The sound is gentle, haunting, almost enough to forget the pain in your throat or the weight in your limbs. A dying man beside you asks for a final prayer. Two nuns arrive. One holds his hand, the other smooths his hair. There's no cure, but there is kindness. You realize then that this hospital isn't about saving lives. It's about giving suffering a shape, wrapping it in ritual, music, and mercy, so that even death doesn't feel quite so cruel. You close your eyes and drift towards sleep, not knowing if you'll wake up. But at least here, in this dim, drafty hall, someone might notice if you don't. And that, in this world, is its own kind of medicine. You wake suddenly, not because of noise, but because of pain, a sharp, hot lurch in your side that feels like someone shoved a dagger into your ribs and decided to wiggle it for emphasis. You try to sit up. Bad idea. Breathing makes it worse. Someone nearby notices your grimace and fetches help. Not a physician, but a monk with a belt full of knives and a jug of wine. "Oh, good," he says cheerfully. "You're conscious. Makes it easier." You are about to be operated on. There is no consent form, no sterile gown, no soothing music or scented candles. Just a table, a rope to bite, and a very strong man assigned to hold you down by the shoulders. Welcome to medieval surgery, where anesthesia is a prayer, antiseptic is wine, and the surgeon is either your last hope or your early funeral. You ask what the plan is. The monk pats your head and says, "Drain the pus." That's all. The instruments are terrifying. Hooks, scalpels, saws. Some are iron, some bronze. One looks suspiciously like a fish-gutting tool. All have seen far too many previous patients. He pours wine on your side. "To cleanse," he says. Then he pours more into your mouth. "To forget." Historians still argue whether wine and opiates were effective enough to be considered real anesthesia or just distractions. You're about to find out. The cut is fast, too fast. Pain explodes like fireworks behind your eyes. You bite down on the rope so hard your jaw cramps. You don't pass out. You wish you had. You hear him muttering something about yellowish discharge, good sign. And then he stitches you up with a needle the size of your thumb and thread that smells vaguely of sheep. No gloves, no clean cloths, no knowledge of bacteria because bacteria hasn't been invented yet, or rather no one can see it, so it doesn't count. He finishes with a poultice of honey and moss. "Nature's bandage," he explains. "The moss stops the blood. The honey keeps out corruption. To your fever-dazed mind, that actually sounds logical." Later, you learn that some medieval surgeons were surprisingly advanced, especially those trained in Arabic or Byzantine medicine. In Italy and southern France, texts like Chirurgia Magna and works by Albucasis were slowly shifting the idea of surgery from brute force to actual technique. But you're not in Italy, you're in a village. And the monk's only textbook is, "I've done this before." He gives you a small charm to wear, 2 dried beans sewn into cloth. "For recovery," he says. "And balance." The next bed over holds a man missing 2 fingers and a toe. "Battle wound," he explains. "They cut off the rest before it spread." You ask how it happened. He shrugs. "Arrow, or maybe a dog, doesn't matter. They stitched me, that's all." Surgeries are rarely clean. Most end in infection, fever, or gangrene, but the ones who survive, they become legends, The woman who lived through a leg amputation and still dances at harvest. The man who had his skull cracked and now hears everything twice. The boy who lost 3 ribs and insists he sleeps better now. The local barber surgeon invites you to watch a procedure later that day. Nothing fancy, just pulling a rotten tooth. You follow him into his shop, which doubles as a general grooming station. A man is already in the chair, pale and sweating. He nods at you, teeth chattering. The barber doesn't wash his hands. He just takes out a long iron tool that resembles an antique corkscrew and wedges it under the tooth. One twist, one yank, a sound like a snapped tree branch, screaming, spitting blood into a wooden bowl. The barber beams. Perfect extraction. You wonder if it was the right tooth. You also learn that trepanation, the act of drilling into the skull, was occasionally performed to release bad spirits or relieve pressure. The survival rate? Questionable, but the holes in the skulls, found centuries later, show signs of healing, which means at least some patients lived. You meet a man later that day with a long scar across his forehead and an odd sense of humor. "Got rid of my melancholy?" he laughs, "or at least half of it." Back in your room, you rest. Your side throbs, but the wound hasn't worsened. That's a good sign. A nun brings you a small cup of sage broth and checks your bandage. She hums softly, then applies another layer of moss and whispers a blessing. The surgical monk drops by before bed. "Still with us?" he asks, smiling. "Barely." He nods, satisfied. "Good. Tomorrow we drain the back." You groan. Sleep comes in fits and starts. Fever licks at the edges of your thoughts. You dream of hands and blades and voices muttering in Latin. You dream of being sewn back together with bits of string and candle wax, but you're still breathing. In a world where a splinter can kill you, survival is always something to celebrate, even if it comes with a limp and a new distrust of knives. You're back on your feet, sort of. Your side aches like it's hosting a tiny blacksmith, but at least you're upright. Today, the air feels different. Not cleaner, not safer, just tenser, like something invisible is about to happen. You follow a procession of quiet women toward a home at the edge of the village, one with painted symbols around the door and white linens hung from the window. A child was born here last night, or at least that was the hope. Medieval childbirth is not a joyful, candlelit moment with swaddled babies and smiling midwives. It's a gamble, a battle, and for many women, the last thing they'll ever do. You step inside and are met with the scent of blood, sweat, ash, and something herbal. Maybe myrrh, maybe fear. The room is small and windowless, made darker still by the thick curtains hung for privacy and spiritual protection. The midwife stands at the center, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back with red thread, believed to ward off evil. She's wiping her hands with a cloth that's seen too much. Her face is unreadable. The mother lies in bed, pale, not yet speaking. The baby makes no sound. You're not sure if that's a pause or a final silence. A second woman begins heating water over the fire. "To clean," she says softly, though clean is a very generous word in this setting. Childbirth in this era is handled almost exclusively by women. Physicians are rarely present. Men are usually banned from the birthing room altogether, unless someone's already died and they've been called in for the last rites. Historians still argue whether midwives were undervalued or quietly revered, but their importance is undeniable. They guide, instruct, pray, rub backs, deliver babies, stop bleeding when they can, and offer comfort when there's nothing left to do but sing the infant into the afterlife. If things go well, a baby is swaddled, blessed, and quickly baptized, often within minutes. Why? Because medieval theology teaches that an unbaptized infant's soul may be left in limbo. So even if the child only takes one breath, the midwife might dab water on its forehead, just in case. Some even keep emergency holy water in their apron pockets. You're ushered out as a second birth begins in the next room. Twins. The mother is wailing. The midwife is steady. The assistant mutters the names of saints under her breath like a mantra. Agnes, Margaret, Brigid. One woman recites St. Margaret's Charm, a prayer with a built-in spell. As Margaret passed through the pain of the dragon unharmed, so may this child pass through the gates of birth in health. You've never hoped harder that dragons exist. On a nearby shelf you notice the tools of the trade. A birthing stool, a sort of wooden chair with a hole in the seat. Straps for gripping, rags, herbs to dull pain, candles lit for protection, and a book, leather-bound, with worn corners and stains that could be anything. Later, the midwife shows you one of the gentler tools, a birthing girdle. It's a strip of parchment inscribed with holy texts and saintly images worn around the woman's belly during labor. It doesn't stop pain, but it reframes it, makes the agony sacred. Then there are the more desperate measures. If labor stops, they try mugwort, fennel, or sometimes shock tactics, icy water dashed on the face, bells rung by the ear. If the child is stuck, the midwife may attempt to turn it by hand. If that fails, well, the options are limited and harrowing. You hear whispers about craniotomy, a last resort procedure involving a sharp hook and a terrible decision: save the mother or try to save the child. One midwife you meet simply says, "I pray it never comes to that." After the delivery, if both survive, the rituals begin: baths in lavender and thyme, belly wrappings, broths heavy with garlic and onions, and always blessings on the child's limbs, on the mother's breasts, on the doors and windows, because in the days that follow infection lurks. It's called childbed fever now, but back then they call it the rot. No one knows it's caused by dirty hands and contaminated cloths. They just know it strikes fast and often fatally. You hear of entire villages where midwives begin to pass around the same sponge, unaware they're spreading death from house to house. And when the mother dies, the baby is often handed to the church or another nursing woman, if one is available. If not, goat's milk, sometimes wine. You ask a midwife if she ever cries. She nods, then adds, "But only after the last candle goes out." Not every story ends in sorrow. Later, you visit a woman who gave birth to her 6th child last week. She's sitting up, smiling weakly, and nursing with one hand while spooning broth with the other. "Just a bit of tearing," she says casually, as if that's not the most alarming sentence you've ever heard. Her secret? Prayer. And a stubborn baby. Before you leave, you glimpse the baby again, wrapped tightly, face peaceful, fingers curled like fern fronds. You realize that every birth in this world is a miracle, not because it's beautiful, but because it happened at all. As night falls, you pass a group of midwives walking home, shoes muddy, faces unreadable. One hums a lullaby under her breath. Tomorrow, someone else will need them, and they'll show up again, candles in hand, stepping into the dark with nothing but warm water, steady hands, and silent hope. The next morning arrives with the sound of hooves thundering down the road. You step outside to see a messenger riding hard toward the village square. His cloak is torn, his arm is bleeding, and he's shouting for help. People gather, cautiously, still wary of plague breath, but it becomes clear this man's injuries aren't contagious. He's from the battlefield, and today you're going to see what happens when medieval medicine meets medieval war. The wounded are brought in on carts, slung between mules or carried by comrades. The injuries are familiar in the worst way: sword gashes, arrow wounds, crushed ribs, mangled hands, concussed heads, and one poor soul with an entire crossbow bolt still lodged in his thigh. There's no military hospital, no army of trained medics waiting in neat white coats. Just a makeshift healing station set up outside the monastery, stocked with what little can be scrounged: wine, old linen, a few herbs, and a man they call Brother Stitch. He's not a doctor, he's a monk with steady hands and a remarkable tolerance for blood. You watch as he kneels beside a man whose leg is mangled beyond repair. Without ceremony, he pulls out a saw. No numbing agent, no sterilization. Just a cup of wine poured down the patient's throat and a wooden spoon to bite. Amputation begins. The saw crunches through flesh, then bone. You flinch at every stroke. The patient screams once, then slumps, maybe unconscious, maybe mercifully numb. Either way, the monk moves quickly, wrapping the stump in linen and coating it with pitch and ash to seal the wound. It smells like burnt pork and something sadder. This is standard procedure. Battlefield medicine is all about triage. If your wound bleeds cleanly and you're still shouting, you're probably worth saving. If you're quiet and pale, the monks cross themselves and move on. They call it God's decision. You meet a boy no older than 16 with an arrow through his shoulder. The tip has broken off inside. They use pliers and a knife to dig it out. You can hear the metal scraping bone. Afterward, they fill the hole with a paste of honey, cobwebs, and vinegar. The honey fights corruption, the monk explains. The cobwebs hold it together. You make a mental note to never swat a spider again. Historians still argue whether battlefield survival rates were due more to luck than technique, and standing here now, it's easy to see why. Some recover miraculously. Others die with barely a scratch, because they caught infection, because the bleeding wouldn't stop, or because no one knew about shock. One man has a large gash across his scalp. They shave his head with a dull knife and pour wine directly into the wound, followed by crushed thyme. He curses, then passes out. They smile. That's a good sign. Concussion? Not recognized. Internal bleeding? Untreatable. Crushed ribs? Wrap the chest and hope the heart doesn't collapse. Missing fingers? Bandage and bind, infection setting in. Boil water, light candles, and pray. And yet there's something strangely heroic about these healers. They're exhausted, overwhelmed, and working in mud with second-hand tools. But they're here. They show up, they hold hands, whisper psalms, and rub aching foreheads. It's messy mercy. You meet a woman with a smashed knee, likely trampled. They apply a poultice of ground comfrey root, nicknamed bone knit, and bind her tightly. You'll walk again, they promise, just differently. She nods. I've always walked a little differently. Someone laughs. It's the first time all day. Further down the field, you spot the surgical tent, though calling it a tent is generous. It's a patch of linen propped with sticks. Inside, an older man in faded robes sharpens a blade while muttering about Greek theories of wound closure. He explains that healing depends on the body's natural heat, but too much warmth brings fever, and too much cold brings death. You're not sure what you've learned, but he looks very wise. At the edge of the camp, a few patients recover in hammocks strung between trees. One is missing an ear, another both thumbs. They trade stories, sip weak beer, and joke about becoming left-handed. Later, a priest arrives to bless the wounded. He doesn't heal, but he listens. He wipes foreheads, holds trembling hands, and sings softly as the sun begins to set. One soldier asks if heaven has beds that don't smell like feet. The priest smiles. Feathers and no fleas. You help carry the dead to a simple pit, already half filled. One man is buried with a token of his wife's, an embroidered scrap of cloth. Another with a wooden crucifix, still stained with dried blood. No funeral speeches, just dirt and silence. You return to the monastery with the last load of bandages to boil. You're not a doctor. You're not a healer. But today you were useful. And that counts. You close your eyes on a hard cot with the sound of distant groans still echoing in your ears. Your dreams are sharp and red and silent. You survived another day in a world where medicine is less about miracles and more about making pain matter a little less. You sleep in fits. Dreams bleed into waking, flashes of sores, red-stained hands, voices praying under breath. But come morning, the sounds are different, louder, stranger. You open your eyes and hear laughter. Odd, not joyful laughter. It's higher, sharp, echoing with something else underneath. You follow the sound to the edge of the square, where a woman is pacing in circles, arms outstretched, muttering to someone who isn't there. A few villagers stand nearby, watching. One crosses himself, another just shakes her head. She's gone mad, someone says. But no one calls a doctor, because in this time, mental illness isn't considered illness. It's punishment, possession, or personality. The woman collapses, sobbing. A child inches forward to offer her a crust of bread. She laughs again, then throws it and screams that it's poisoned. You take a step back. In the medieval world, the mind is an invisible battlefield, and anyone who behaves too oddly risks being labeled touched, cursed, or worse, possessed. The causes vary wildly. Some say madness comes from bad humors, too much black bile, of course. Others believe it's due to sin, moral weakness, or even witchcraft. And then there's always the fallback answer, the devil. You watch as a local friar approaches the woman. He's not carrying medicine, he's carrying holy water, a small crucifix, and a book of prayers. No sedative, no understanding, just scripture and sorrow. He sprinkles her gently, murmuring Latin. She weeps harder. There is no diagnosis, no therapy, just fear and faith. Later you're told about other mad villagers. The old man who insists his wife is still alive and speaks to the walls. The boy who won't stop drawing circles in the dirt. The girl who sings the same song at night, always barefoot. Some are shunned. Others are tolerated as long as they don't disrupt the crops, but treatment, such as it is, depends on who's watching. You're invited to a ritual that night, a cleansing they call it. The afflicted woman is brought to the chapel and laid near the altar. Candles burn at each corner, psalms are sung. A relic of St. Dymphna, the patron saint of mental illness, is placed beneath her pillow. There's no screaming possession today, no theatrical exorcism, just quiet weeping and exhausted repetition. It's meant to help, you're not sure it does. Historians still argue whether cases of possession were actually untreated mental illnesses, epilepsy, or trauma. It's likely all of the above. But without language to describe these states, people fall back on what they understand, sin and spirits. You pass a house later that evening where a man is being kept in chains. His brother says he once tried to drown himself in the well and now won't stop howling when the moon is full. They feed him broth through the window. He stares out silently. In some rare places, larger towns or enlightened abbeys, there are fools' houses or dedicated beds for those with mental disturbances. But most simply, stay at home, locked away, or left to wander. The lucky ones are tolerated as eccentrics. The unlucky ones are punished, beaten, or killed. Some are forced to wear bells or distinctive clothing to mark them as different. Others are believed to have been gifted or cursed with second sight. You meet a woman said to hear angels, though she's mostly ignored. She offers you a flower, then walks away without blinking. There are herbal remedies, of course. Poppy syrup to sedate, valerian root to soothe, lavender for sleep. But they're blunt tools, and when they fail, the treatments grow harsher. Ice baths, isolation, bleeding, or, worse, trepanation, that ghastly hole drilled in the skull to let out demons. You meet a man who underwent the procedure. He insists he's fine now, then asks you if birds speak in Latin. You don't answer. Not all treatment is brutal. Some monks believe in talking therapy of a sort, quiet conversation, listening, patience, but it's rare, and often overruled by fear. The line between eccentricity and danger is thin. If someone with a troubled mind harms a child, offends a priest, or merely scares the wrong person, the punishment can be severe: shackling, beating, or execution. You remember the woman from this morning. She's sitting under a tree now, humming, face smeared with ash. No one dares go near her, but they leave her food. That's something. And through all this, there's no real understanding, no word for depression, no theory of trauma, no grasp of the nervous system or neurochemistry, only metaphors. You overhear a young boy whispering to his sister, "She lost her soul." Maybe that's how it feels. That night you lie awake, thinking about the line between sick and sinful, between needing help and being feared. It's a blurry, shifting thing. And here, in the medieval world, the mind is as mysterious as the stars, but with far fewer people trying to understand it. You say a quiet prayer to St. Dymphna, just in case. Then you close your eyes and hope your thoughts stay still until morning. Morning brings a strange calm, almost as if the village has exhaled after a long, fevered night. You wander past the market, the chapel, and a cart full of firewood before being lured by a familiar, very specific sound, a scream. Not the kind of scream you heard on the battlefield. No, this is shorter, sharper, almost embarrassed. You follow it to a corner stall where a man is clutching his face and glaring at the local tooth puller. The barber surgeon, apron dusted with soot and pepper flakes, holds up a bloodied metal tool and shrugs. "Tooth's out," he says. "Probably." Welcome to medieval dentistry, a charming blend of wishful thinking, brute strength, and pure improvisation. The patient stumbles away, holding a cloth to his mouth, groaning softly. The next one is already being beckoned forward. You watch with the mild horror of someone observing a blacksmith perform brain surgery. The barber rinses his pliers in a bucket of water that definitely has history. He picks up a fresh rag and smiles. "Bit of bad breath and pain in the jaw?" he asks the next victim. Patient. The man nods. "Open wide. You've seen blood, you've seen bone. But there's something uniquely unsettling about seeing someone's molar fly out in a little arc and land with a clink in a metal bowl. Perfect angle, the barber boasts. It's not just extractions. That's the most common, sure, but some barbers also offer tooth cleaning, usually involving a rough linen cloth, salt, and occasionally vinegar boiled with rosemary. The result? A burning tongue and slightly brighter enamel, assuming the vinegar hasn't eroded it first. Historians still argue whether any medieval dental practices were effective, or if they simply accelerated the journey toward dentures, which, by the way, were sometimes made of animal bone or human teeth taken from the deceased. Nothing says eternal rest like having your incisor repurposed by a baron. You pass a woman hawking clove oil for toothaches. She lets you sniff it. Sharp, intense, surprisingly pleasant. It's one of the few things in this century that actually does what it claims, a mild numbing effect. But once the oil wears off, there's no backup plan, just more pliers. One man, well into his 40s, proudly shows you his mouth. Only 3 teeth remain. "All mine," he declares. You don't mention that they're black. Tooth decay is common. Medieval diets include lots of honey, dried fruit, and coarse bread ground with stone. That last one means grit and sand often end up in the dough, slowly wearing away enamel over the years. By age 30, many people are missing teeth or chewing with whatever's left. You meet a nun who swears by sage leaves and mint for keeping her gums pink. She smiles, and honestly, her teeth look better than most. She offers you a sprig. "Chew it at sunset," she says. After prayers, it makes your breath saintly. Tooth pain, though, is where things get dangerous. Infection can lead to abscesses, which can swell and spread. If the swelling moves toward the neck or eyes, the prognosis is grim. One man, unable to speak, points at his swollen cheek and moans. The barber nods solemnly and begins heating a small iron rod over the fire. You don't need to be told what comes next: cauterization. It's used for open wounds, bleeding, and apparently tooth infections. The idea is simple. Burn it until it stops hurting, or until the pain makes everything else irrelevant. You witness the procedure once, just once. The smell of scorched flesh stays with you longer than the memory of the scream. Not everyone chooses pain. The rich sometimes use narcotic blends made from poppy, henbane, or mandrake root to dull the senses before a major extraction. But these are risky. Doses aren't precise. One pinch too much, and you're not waking up. Some turn to folk remedies, rubbing garlic on their gums or placing roasted onions behind their ears. Others use talismans, like a tiny carved tooth made of bone, to protect against decay. One child you meet has one sewn into her tunic. Another popular option: do nothing, live with the pain, chew on the other side, or complain creatively, like the man you meet who insists the pain is from demons lodged behind the molars. He's had 3 teeth pulled, the demons remain. You visit the local apothecary who offers tooth powder made from crushed eggshells, ashes, and dried mint. Scrub with your finger, she advises. You try it once. It's like brushing with beach sand, but minty. You also hear of a remedy involving dog's milk, though thankfully no one is actively offering to demonstrate. By evening, the tooth puller has packed up for the day. His tools clink as he wraps them in stained linen. His hands are filthy. His smile is proud. 4 teeth today, he tells you. Only one broke halfway. You consider clapping, then decide a nod is safer. You rub your own jaw absent-mindedly, suddenly very aware of every tooth in your head. They feel, okay, for now, but here, in this time, even a single molar gone rogue can turn into a death sentence. You rinse your mouth with cold water. You chew a sage leaf for good measure. You mumble a quiet promise to never take dentists for granted again. And as you settle into sleep, you wonder, what's worse, losing your teeth or having to watch someone else yank them out with joy? You decide to keep smiling with your mouth closed, just in case. The next morning, you wake up to the smell of something expensive. It's sweet, almost floral. You follow the scent through the village until it leads you to a manor house, stone walls, leaded windows, and banners fluttering like lazy birds. A servant opens the door just wide enough to see your face and determine that you're not important. But you catch a glimpse inside: gold trim, polished wood, fine linens, and in the center of it all, a sick man propped up in bed drinking gold. No, really, liquid gold. You've arrived at the strange and glittering edge of medieval medicine, the world of the wealthy unwell, where treatment is part performance, and the more it sparkles, the better. Nobles and royals don't drink the same bitter herb stews or suffer the barber's blade. They hire court physicians, often from distant lands with exotic names and bags full of vials. These doctors speak Latin, wear robes, and occasionally carry pocket-sized astrological charts. Most importantly, they charge enough to build a small village. You peer in again and see the nobleman sipping something yellow from a silver cup. His physician explains that it's aurum potabile, drinkable gold, dissolved in a mix of herbs and alcohol. It's supposed to strengthen the heart, cleanse the blood, and infuse the spirit with the purity of precious metal. You doubt it works, but it sounds impressive. And for the rich, impressive is often more important than effective. In another chamber, a noblewoman applies a powdered pearl face mask to cool the complexion. She's recovering from a fever and believes the skin must be soothed to calm the liver. You're not sure how that logic tracks, but she looks very pleased with herself. You're handed a small booklet containing royal remedies: crushed emeralds for seizures, distilled rubies for unsteadiness of thought, unicorn horn shavings, spoiler, usually narwhal tusk, for poison prevention. Historians still argue whether noble remedies had symbolic power or simply emptied purses. Either way, the belief was sincere and often lavish. One physician you meet shows you his prized possession, a book of cures handwritten in gold ink, passed down through generations of royal doctors. Inside are recipes for syrups made with rose water, saffron, cinnamon, and lapis lazuli. They're more potion than prescription, and they smell incredible. Some nobles believe in balancing the humours through diet alone. Their kitchens become alchemical laboratories. Quail's eggs soaked in silver wine, lamb lungs poached in clove broth, gooseberries boiled in violet syrup. Each meal a course in balance, each spoonful a gesture toward immortality. And if the illness worsens, they bring in relics. You watch as a servant carries in a crystal vial containing a splinter of what is claimed to be St. Catherine's finger bone. The sick noble kisses it gently. He looks no better afterward, but he smiles. That counts for something. In the garden, a noble child is being treated for night fits by being wrapped in cloth embroidered with the names of the three magi. The physician instructs that the wrapping occur at midnight, under the third quarter moon, while reading from a sacred text. You ask if the cloth was washed first. He looks offended. Not all noble treatments are mystical. Some are just, grand. The patient is always surrounded by attendants, servants, and priests, all whispering concern and layering the room in importance. Illness, for the wealthy, becomes a kind of performance, a signal of refinement, a reason to rest, and an opportunity to show off your physician like you would a prized war horse. You hear of a baron who had a private bath filled with red wine and marigold petals to ease his melancholy. A countess who commissioned a gold-inlaid leech box. A duke who insisted on bathing in milk and honey during Lent, because holiness shouldn't mean discomfort. Later, you visit a smaller manor where the family physician is administering a bezoar, a stone taken from a goat's stomach believed to neutralize poisons. He drops it into wine and stares at it meaningfully. The patient drinks and nods solemnly. Tastes earthy, she says. You don't ask questions. Even the royal bedchambers are part of the healing process. Fresh herbs are scattered under pillows. Tapestries are chosen for their calming depictions. One bed you see is carved entirely from cedar and inlaid with prayers written in 6 languages. You ask a servant what happens when all the glitter fails, when the patient worsens. He lowers his voice. Then we say it's fate or sorcery, because even the rich must blame someone. That evening you overhear a conversation between 2 noble ladies. One boasts that her cousin recovered from a winter fever after 3 days of crushed diamonds mixed with goat's milk and a touch of honey. The other nods and says, "Ah yes, the Flemish cure." You're not sure whether to laugh or weep. As you walk back to your more modest quarters, the smell of saffron lingers in your clothes. You feel oddly healthy, because if you can afford gold, pearls, and powdered gemstones, maybe you don't need medicine at all, just the belief that you're above sickness and everyone else. And if you die, well, at least you died surrounded by expensive smells. The next morning, you're jolted awake by a shriek from the courtyard. Not the human kind, something more feathery. You rush outside and discover a goose on someone's chest, wings flapping as the poor soul yells and flails. Around them, a group of villagers stands calmly, nodding as if this is a totally reasonable event. A woman nearby murmurs, "He's got lung rot. Goose heat draws it out." Sure. Welcome to the zoological wing of medieval medicine, where animals aren't just for eating or company, they're part of the cure. And by part, we often mean literally part. It starts with the goose, warm, heavy, preferably alive, placed on the patient's chest to pull illness from the lungs. It's believed that a goose's breath and warmth can soothe coughs and restore balance to troubled humours, especially if it honks in rhythm with the patient's wheezing. You try not to laugh. Someone might prescribe you a goose. Another healer swears by toad therapy. She shows you a small linen pouch, tied tight, with a dried toad inside. It's meant to be worn around the neck to ward off fevers. If the toad is alive, it's even better. Just tie it to the foot of the bed and wait for it to absorb the sickness. You ask what happens to the toad. She shrugs. It dies. That means it worked. Charming. You then learn about animal-based poultices, goose fat rubbed on the chest for colds, pig lard mixed with parsley to ease sore joints, cow dung smeared behind the ears for swelling, earthworms crushed with wine for toothaches. Yes. Worms. Historians still argue whether these animal-based treatments were based on real observations or magical thinking, but they're documented with surprising frequency. And the lines between cure, charm, and curiosity blur quickly in a world without germ theory. In one home, a mother applies spiderwebs to her daughter's scraped knee. Stops the bleeding, she says confidently, and she's not wrong. Spider silk contains mild coagulant properties. You're both horrified and impressed. Then you see something more intense, a man with a live rooster tied to his stomach. It draws out the plague, his wife explains. The rooster takes it into himself. You glance at the rooster. He looks extremely unhappy. Nearby, another woman prepares a cat fur compress for her husband's aching legs. She brushes the fur into a fine mat, wraps it in linen, and heats it over the fire. Cats are creatures of warmth, she says. They chase away chill. You're starting to get it. In this era, animals are medicine in motion, tied to nature, warmth, and symbolism. The fox is clever, the goat is hardy, the dog loyal, the pigeon pure. All are believed to share their essence with the humans they help or haunt. In the village square, a merchant sells ground horn from what he claims is a dragon, though it's likely a ram. It's supposed to cure impotence and nightmares. Another stall offers snake oil, literally, fat rendered from serpents and blended with myrrh, for joint pain, for haunted bones. You pass a boy clutching a live mouse. It's for my mum, he explains. She's got swelling. We put it in a bag and hang it under her bed. You ask what happens if it dies. Then the swelling goes away. Of course, at one point you hear the word alchemy and follow it to a small stone hut where a wide-eyed man is distilling what he calls life essence from ferret glands and boiled ant legs. He insists he's close to discovering a universal tonic. Just one more weasel, he says. One more. You back out slowly. Then there's urine of the goat, used in eye drops, donkey milk for complexion, crushed beetle for warts, and, most stomach-turning of all, a woman preparing a treatment for a deep cut using rotten meat left out for 3 days, because the decay fights the decay. You don't ask for details, yet not all animal-based remedies are revolting. You find a gentle older man caring for bees who uses honey to dress wounds. It's sticky, yes, but it has natural antibacterial properties, and his patients tend to recover with fewer infections. Even the monks approve. You also meet a woman who keeps carrier pigeons, not for messages, but for company. She believes their presence in the sick room brings calm. Her logic? They never scream, and they never lie. You find yourself strangely comforted. By the end of the day, you've seen at least 7 animals applied directly to human bodies, and only one of them bit someone. You now believe that medieval villagers would put a hedgehog on your head if someone told them it fixed headaches. And honestly, it might. Because when you're desperate and your options are limited to vinegar, prayers, or something warm and feathery, a goose starts to sound very reasonable. That night, back in your cot, you curl up with your cloak tight around your chest. There's a strange sound outside, maybe a donkey, maybe something else, and you wonder idly what part of that animal someone might use for indigestion. You're still wondering as you fall asleep, half hoping that if your fever returns, someone might try the rooster trick, but maybe ask the rooster first. By now, you've come to understand that medieval medicine doesn't live neatly in apothecaries or under vaulted monastery roofs. It seeps through everything, into the fields, into kitchens, into dreams whispered to the wind. And nowhere is this more clear than in the domain of folk healing and rural magic. You wander beyond the village walls where the paths narrow and the trees huddle together like they're keeping secrets. An old woman waits in a mossy clearing. She's wearing layers, wool, linen, something that might once have been velvet, and she carries a staff carved with symbols you can't decipher. You ask if she's a healer. She laughs, then says, "Only when the herbs obey." Welcome to folk medicine, where healing blends into superstition, and half the cure is in believing. She shows you her toolkit, a pouch of dried rowan berries for protection, bits of iron nail to anchor the spirit, and a lock of someone's hair, identity unclear. You blink. She nods. Hair carries memory, she explains. Sometimes disease starts there. You don't argue. She mixes a potion for someone with a restless soul, a blend of valerian, ash bark, and a touch of wine poured over a riverstone that's never been touched by sunlight. The final step? Bury it at a crossroads before sunrise. That's not in any medical textbook, but it's part of the deep, old current running under medieval life, the belief that illness isn't just physical, it's spiritual, social, and maybe even personal. If you're sick, it might be your humours, or your neighbour's envy, or the bad luck you picked up when you walked across that old bridge. One young woman tells you she was cured of nightmares by tying 3 knots into a red string, spitting over her left shoulder and hanging the string on a yew tree. "Haven't dreamed since," she says proudly. You nod like that's a good thing. Historians still argue whether folk healing was survival wisdom or sanctioned guesswork, but many remedies came from centuries of trial, error, and shared experience. And most importantly, they were accessible. When you couldn't afford saffron or doctors, you turned to someone who could pluck healing from weeds. You learn about sympathetic magic, treating illness by mimicking it, transferring it, or tricking it. A child with a rash might have the rash drawn onto a piece of parchment and thrown into a fire. A man with a limp might be told to carry a stone from a holy well and leave it in the bed of a passing stranger. Illness moved like shadow, like rumour. You meet a woman who healed her husband's back pain by baking bread shaped like his spine and feeding it to the cat. "Worked fine," she says. "Cat's still jumpy, though." Then there are curses. You hear whispers about a farmhand whose cough won't stop. "His sister cursed him after he stole her comb," someone mutters. "They've tried sage, honey, and fasting. Nothing worked. So now they're digging up the spot where he buried the comb. And if that doesn't work, they'll go to the hedge witch. You find her deep in the woods, her hut woven from branches, bones hanging above the doorway. She's younger than you expect. Her voice is soft, but her eyes are sharp. "You want a charm?" she asks. "Or a warning?" You say you're just observing. She shrugs. Everyone's sick in their own way. She shows you her healing stones marked with chalk, rubbed with nettle. She uses smoke reading to diagnose, toss herbs into the fire and read the swirl. If it turns left, bad news. If it sputters, you're cursed. If it vanishes, you're already dead inside. You don't ask for a reading. The line between faith and fear in this world is hair thin. Healing rituals often borrow from Christian rites, crosses carved in bread, psalms whispered over wounds, but they also slip into older rhythms, moon cycles, animal omens, personal grudges. Sometimes the priest blesses it, sometimes he warns against it. You pass a cottage with garlic braided across every beam, not for flavor, for protection. Inside, a girl lies in bed, pale and trembling. Her grandmother walks around her 3 times, each loop slower than the last, whispering something in a dialect you don't know. They believe someone looked at her the wrong way, or maybe a sprite followed her home. Either way, no one's calling the physician. Not yet. You ask the hedge witch how she knows what works. She shrugs. If it helps, I keep it. If it kills someone, I change the ratio. That's probably the most honest medicine you've heard all week. Before you leave, she gives you a protective charm, 3 crow feathers bound with twine and sage. Hang it where you sleep, she says. Keeps away bad breath and worse dreams. You thank her and mean it. That night, back in the village, someone falls ill. A fever, a rattle in the chest. The priest is away. The surgeon is drunk, so someone runs to the woods and the healer comes. She doesn't wear robes, she doesn't speak Latin, but she brings warmth, smells of time, words older than books, and somehow that's enough for people to hope. You hang your feather charm above your cot and sleep without dreams, which, by medieval standards, might be the greatest cure of all. You awaken to a soft bell and the smell of parchment and rosemary. Today you walk not toward the square or the fields, but up a winding path toward a stone building nestled against a hillside, the monastery. Its arched windows glow faintly with morning light. You cross the threshold and are greeted not with prayers or incense, but with the low scratch of quills and the rustle of robes. This is where medicine speaks Latin. The monks do not advertise themselves as doctors, but they are keepers of knowledge, and in this time that makes them healers by default. You pass rows of candles and shelves crammed with handwritten volumes, some from local scholars, some copied from ancient Greek and Roman texts, and others translated from Arabic sources, their ink still fresh, their margins filled with careful notes. "Galen," a young monk says proudly, tapping a thick tome, "and Avicenna." Both agree, fennel is good for digestion. You nod, partly because you agree, partly because you don't want to be corrected in Latin. This monastery has its own physic garden, lovingly tended by the novices. Here, medical plants grow under the watchful eye of both God and bees. Lavender for calm, rue for protection, mint for upset bellies, wormwood for parasites, and monkshood handled only with gloves, because even the faithful know it's deadly. The monks teach you the layout. Each herb has its own bed, labeled with a wooden marker carved with both name and purpose. Order reflects holiness, one of them explains. Even in medicine. Inside, you're shown the infirmary, a long, cool room with narrow beds separated by curtains. Patients here are mostly elderly monks or peasants from nearby villages, brought in when they've been deemed savable and in need of spiritual guidance as much as treatment. A frail man groans softly under a linen sheet. A novice gently dabs his forehead with rose water. Another brings him a drink made from barley, honey, and vinegar, a tonic known to settle the stomach and cool fevers. You sit beside a brother who's grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle. "Preparation is everything," he says. "God made the plants, we arrange them." He offers you a pinch of dried hyssop to smell. It's sharp, clean, strangely uplifting. This isn't folk healing or flamboyant showmanship. It's careful, studied, structured. Everything is logged in books, every recipe noted, every observation quietly recorded. You see one monk carefully sketching a patient's swollen leg. Another is mapping the growth cycle of medicinal plants with seasonal notes. Comfrey, best cut near midsummer while dew remains. Historians still argue whether monastic medicine was more science or theology, but here you see both at play. The monks don't just treat, they document, they preserve, and sometimes they even question. One older brother shows you a collection of urine flasks, each one neatly labelled by colour and scent. Diagnosis begins here, he says. We look, we smell, we compare. You don't ask to try. Then there's the scriptorium, where a single candle illuminates the bent back of a monk copying a healing manual into a new volume. His hands are steady, his Latin crisp, his letters shaped like prayers. You hear about Hildegard of Bingen, a revered abbess and healer, whose work has made its way to this very abbey. Her ideas mix theology, herbalism, and practical advice, like chewing parsley before singing or using nutmeg for sorrow. One monk calls her the voice of wisdom. Another just calls her Mother Hildegard. There's respect here, for learning, for nature, for rhythm. And yet, even the monks know their limits. We do not open the body, one says firmly. That is for butchers or God. Surgery is still taboo in many monasteries. Instead, they focus on what they can reach, the skin, the breath, the stomach, the spirit. You ask what they do when someone is truly beyond help. We pray, the abbot replies, but we also hold their hand. A simple answer, a powerful one. You spend the rest of the day helping grind herbs for ointments, honey and calendula for wounds, vinegar and sage for infection, goose fat and mustard seed for aches. Each mixture has a place, a purpose, and, if you're lucky, an effect. Before you leave, a monk hands you a small scroll. A prayer for safe digestion, he says, also helps with travel sickness. You smile. Is it in Latin? Of course, he grins. Even your stomach must understand holiness. That night, you rest near the chapel. A soft chant drifts through the windows. The stars seem sharper. The air feels lighter. And you think, in a world full of noise and pain, perhaps the most healing thing is a place that listens. Not just to symptoms, but to silence. By now you've tasted goose fat, dodged leeches, survived a surgery, and carried herbs from a monk's garden. But today, something new enters your path. Words you don't understand, elegant ones, scientific ones, names that swirl like silk and sting like wine. You've entered the world of foreign medicine, knowledge preserved far from the plague-ridden corners of Europe, and now returning like light through stained glass. You sit in a cloister with a monk who unfurls a scroll wrapped in linen and care. It's not written in Latin, it's in Arabic, and the script flows like water down the page. He touches the ink with reverence. This is from Al-Razi, he says softly. In Baghdad, they wrote about measles while we were still bloodletting for hiccups. And it's true. While much of Europe stumbled through spiritual explanations and rudimentary balancing acts, the Islamic world preserved and expanded medical knowledge. From the 8th to 13th centuries, cities like Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba, and Damascus were centers of scientific medicine, with hospitals, pharmacies, and training that rivaled anything the West would see for centuries. The monks know this. They don't always admit it loudly, but they know. You read the translated notes aloud, on contagion, on fevers, on the pulse. There are diagrams of the human eye, explanations of surgical instruments, and case notes about kidney stones, so detailed they make your side hurt just thinking about them. One physician, Avicenna, Ibn Sina, wrote The Canon of Medicine, a medical encyclopedia so massive it fills 5 volumes, and becomes required reading in many European universities. His ideas on diagnosis, quarantine, and even mental health are shockingly ahead of their time. You blink at a line about isolating patients during outbreaks. They knew. You meet a merchant who's just returned from Sicily with more than spice in his bags. He carries a medicinal syrup wrapped in palm leaf, prepared in a Moorish apothecary. It's for chest ailments, he says, made with sugar, quince, and rosewater. You taste it. It's thick, fragrant, and somehow doesn't burn your tongue. A rare win. Historians still argue how widely foreign texts were read or understood in medieval Europe, but there's no question they circulated. They were copied, translated, debated, sometimes embraced, sometimes censored, always watched. In Salerno, Italy, a medical school opened its gates to Arabic, Greek, and Jewish texts, creating a rare triangle of intellectual tolerance. There, they believed in combining philosophies, Hippocrates for structure, Galen for practice, Avicenna for reason. You hear stories of Jewish physicians like Maimonides who practiced medicine with clinical precision, emphasizing hygiene, moderation, and ethical care. He even wrote about anxiety in terms that feel modern. You also learn that many of the words you've heard tossed around, syrup, elixir, alcohol, alchemy, come from Arabic. So when someone offers you a small vial labeled Al-Qul, know that you're holding centuries of knowledge distilled into something potent enough to sterilize wounds or spirits. In a small, noble house, you overhear a physician explaining the use of a syringe, an idea borrowed from Arabic surgery texts. For draining abscesses with precision, he says, no guesswork, no slicing, just guidance. You marvel. Of course, not all this knowledge is welcomed. Some church officials worry about heretical influence. They ban certain books, burn others, but not always. Often, the books are read in secret, their covers relabeled, their diagrams copied quietly by candlelight, because truth, once read, is hard to unlearn. You visit a small apothecary run by a woman who studied under a foreign-trained doctor in Marseille. Her remedies are measured, not guessed. She uses scales, ratios, instructions in steps. You ask what changed her practice. She opens a page of Arabic script and simply says, "They taught me to observe." That night, by firelight, you help a friar copy a section of the Book of Simple Medicine, a list of remedies arranged not by symptom, but by effect. Cooling, drying, moistening, heating. It's elegant, intuitive. You suddenly understand why garlic is for fevers and why cucumber helps with thirst. You realize that medicine doesn't belong to one people or one language. It moves, it adapts, it survives plagues and politics. It is at its core human memory trying not to die. You think of the burned texts, the forgotten names, the monk who hides his scroll beneath his robes like a relic, and you feel both sad and lucky. Sad because so much has been lost. Lucky because some still choose to preserve. You go to sleep with one of the copied diagrams beside your pillow, a rough sketch of a lung, labeled in 3 languages. You don't understand it all, but for the first time you believe someone else might. A warm wind rolls in at dawn, carrying with it the dry, coppery scent of something old. You pass through the square and notice the shutters are drawn tight. No songs, no gossip, just silence and the muffled thud of someone hammering shut a door. It's not just sickness this time, it's the plague again. You'd hoped it had passed. You'd hoped the quarantine worked. But this morning, the red crosses multiply on doors like blood blooming through linen. A family disappears from the bakery. 2 grave pits stand open near the chapel. The people are too tired to scream. This time, you don't run to the barber or the priest. You walk to the edge of town where you saw the first grave digger yesterday. Arms like cords, face like stone. He digs faster now. He doesn't pause to pray. Because now the death comes fast, and it doesn't wait for ritual. The Black Death, yes, still, takes many forms. bubonic, the swellings, the fever, the blackened fingers, septicemic, blood thick as tar, slipping into coma, pneumonic, coughing blood across rooms. There is no pattern, only panic. The worst part, no one knows what works, or if anything works at all. You follow a monk carrying a cart of bodies to the pit. He's stopped naming them. One has rosary beads still tangled in his hand. Another still wears a ring. The monk doesn't touch it. No more relics, he mutters, no more gold. You try to help, and he lets you. It's the only job left unclaimed. In the square, the apothecary has shuttered her shop. A note is pinned to the door. Gone to the hills, may St. Rock keep you. Someone has drawn a small heart next to it. It feels like a funeral already. You catch sight of a girl laying lavender on her father's grave, her arms shaking. She doesn't cry. There are no tears left. Just the quiet exhaustion of watching everything familiar rot. And still, the cures continue. One woman smears onion and vinegar on her wrists and sleeps with a cloth stuffed with chopped figs under her pillow. A priest sprinkles holy water mixed with rose oil and ashes of last year's psalter. A midwife burns juniper and rosemary, coughing as she prays. You hear a new theory: the plague is carried by bad thoughts, or maybe birds, or maybe God is just tired of waiting. Historians still argue whether medieval plague responses helped at all, or just gave people something to do while they died. Quarantine sometimes worked, sometimes it trapped the sick with the healthy. Plague doctors came later, but you've seen one early, a man with a long robe and a linen mask soaked in vinegar. He never speaks, he only points. A merchant tells you he's leaving for the coast. Salt air cures, he insists. You ask what he'll eat. He shrugs. Doesn't matter, air's clean. Another man locks his door and builds a fire indoors to burn the plague from the air. You find his body 2 days later. Smoke did the plague's job for it. You pass a mass grave being blessed by a young priest, too afraid to approach the edge. He weeps after every amen. You wonder how long he'll last. In the middle of all this, a strange thing happens. Some people start confessing, not sins, theories, secrets, memories. One woman tells you she once kissed her neighbor's husband. Another man confesses to stealing from the chapel. Maybe that's why God is angry, he whispers. You listen. What else can you do? And then something changes. Not in the plague, not in the bodies, but in the survivors. A boy walks through town handing out bread from his own satchel. A girl braids wildflowers into garlands and leaves them at the feet of the sick. Someone carves "Be well" into the side of the bakery door. No one scolds them for hoping. A monk writes in his journal, "We do not know how this ends, but the sick still breathe, and therefore we must stay. You help bury an old woman you never knew. You place a dried rose in her hand. You say her name once, even though it's the only time you'll ever say it. And when you light a candle that night, you realize this too is medicine. The whisper of fire, the memory of a name, the hand held longer than necessary. The plague doesn't stop, but neither do you. You sleep with smoke in your hair and dirt on your hands. And when you dream, you see every face you've met. The laughing barber, the whispering midwife, the child with fevered eyes, and somehow they're all still walking. The dead multiply, but the living resist. Not with syringes or vaccines, but with hands, herbs, and something impossible to bottle, the choice to keep showing up. You wake to bird song, not a choir of angels, not the eerie stillness of plague. Just ordinary, sweet morning bird song, something you haven't heard in days, or maybe weeks. You've lost track of time in a place where time bends to fever and grief. But today, something is different. The grave pits are still there, but no new bodies lie beside them. The herbs in the physic garden stand tall again, not trampled by desperate feet. You see faces, tired, yes, but alive. Faces looking upward instead of downward. You step outside and breathe deep. Still damp, still smoke-laced, but no longer thick with dread. Someone survived, and now something is changing. Down by the river, a monk reads from a scroll, not scripture, but a letter from the south. New texts, he says, eyes wide. New ways to treat fever, they're writing again in Florence. Another merchant arrives with copies of manuscripts carried over the Alps. Human anatomy diagrams painstakingly sketched, texts on dissection, observation, and, most shocking of all, doubt. Doubt in old ways, doubt in unquestioned theories. You speak with a physician who's returned from Italy. He's seen the first sparks of what some are calling a rebirth. They call it rinascita, he says, a new beginning. And suddenly the world of bleeding, bile, and blind obedience feels old, too old. A wave of curiosity sweeps the abbey. Monks begin comparing Arabic texts, not to correct them, but to learn from them. The Latin-only rule begins to fray. One friar dares to copy a chart in the common tongue. Another sketches a tooth, not symbolically, but anatomically. Even the barber surgeon watches with suspicion as someone brings a printed pamphlet into the village. No need for scribes, they say, no need for secrets. You hear whispers of names, Paracelsus, Vesalius, Copernicus. Not yet saints, not yet safe. But bringers of questions, and questions are the beginning of health. And in some places just ahead of the curve, people have started opening the body. Not to let spirits out, but to see. They are drawing what they find, naming it, studying it, not always perfectly, not always kindly, but openly. You meet a boy learning to read from a book that says, "Nature is a book too." He runs his finger under a line that describes the heart, not as a furnace of emotion, but as a pump. You watch as his eyes flicker. He gets it. The healer, who once swore by toadstones, now grinds dried orange peel and willow bark because a friend of a friend said it helps the joints, and she believes him. Why? Because he tried it, she says, and he got better. Experiment. It's a quiet revolution. And yes, many still cling to the old ways. You still see leeches, amulets, prayers scribbled in panic, but now they stand alongside observation, tools, and thought. The world isn't cured, but it's waking up. Historians now call this the dawn of the Renaissance. But to you, it just feels like people are remembering something they forgot. That knowledge grows best in open air. That healing is part science, part art, part stubbornness. And that survival isn't just not dying, it's changing. You walk back to your resting place. The feather charm still hangs by your cot. The smell of thyme still lingers. And when someone sneezes nearby, no one gasps. Instead, someone says, "Drink some water, rest, and tell me what it feels like." The world is still dangerous, still unfair, still half-blind. But it's looking now, asking, testing. You close your eyes with the softest thought. Maybe, just maybe, you'll live long enough to see what comes next. The fire crackles softly. You're back in your bed, but everything feels quieter now, like the world has tipped onto its side and finally settled. The linen against your skin is rough, but warm. Someone has left a bowl of herbs beside the window, and their scent, lavender, rose, chamomile, floats gently toward you. Your body is tired, but it's no longer fighting. Your breath is slow, deep, even. Outside, the sky is dark velvet. No shouting, no bells, just stars blinking overhead, indifferent and eternal. The village rests. The monks have finished copying. The herbalists sleep beside their jars, the surgeon's knives are wrapped and stored, and you, stranger, traveller, watcher, have made it through one of the hardest worlds history ever imagined, not without pain, but with understanding. You roll over, eyes closing, muscles sinking, and in your final waking thought you realize medicine was never clean, never easy. But even in the darkest centuries, someone lit a candle, mixed a tea, held a hand. That's how it begins. That's how it always begins. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.